Welcome back to Sidebar Extended. When I was away, I had them calling it that. I think I like it, so we're going to call it Sidebar Extended, this 10 p.m. edition of the show. So much to talk about. First of all, can we take 60 seconds to review the week?
You have now decided to move to the Supreme Court and lay before the world the making of a computer-generated leadership.
I can tell you 100% what you see available, and this is a practice all over the world. So what you see available is consistent.
The National Commission on Human Rights can confirm that there has been use of excessive force and misuse of firearms by the police in dealing with members of the public.
As a government, we will not allow loss of life, destruction of property, and looting.
The civil society organizations be permitted to play their very important role in the future.
All right, it's been another dramatic week as the disagreement over the presidential election continues. I've got a panel of lawyers right now, so I'm very intimidated by all these learned friends sitting across from me. Lilian Mahiri-Zaje is back with us. She was the former vice chair of the IEBC. Thank you for coming back on. Miguna Miguna is also with us. He reigned for governor in the great county of Nairobi. Charles Kanjama is back with us, an advocate who comes on our show very many times, and we appreciate that. And Danstan Omari is back on the show as well. All of you lawyers, I have one request from the outset. Like I told you off air, I am a layman of modest education. So go easy on me. And I represent the Kawaida Kenyan in this conversation. Having thus agreed, we're still waiting for Peter Wanyama. If he joins us, that would be wonderful. Let me stay right now. NASA said they were not going to go to court, that they had been there before, at least as called in the last presidential petition, and they were not going to go there. But they said today, because of the intimidation that the civil society has faced, they're now going to go to court, and to quote Raila Odinga, to show what a computer-generated leadership this was. Miguna, what was your reaction to that?
They did exactly what I recommended. You remember I was on Tuesday, I think yesterday, in the morning, I said exactly that. There are justiciable issues that have to be litigated, and they needed to go to court to do that. And so that is a good decision. But he has also said something that I also recommended. He said, as they do that, they will also try to air those issues that cannot be aired before a court of law in the fora where they should be aired. And I think I recommend that. And then he said something that was also very positive. He called for calm. He said people should remain peaceful, which means that they will execute whatever they needed to execute peacefully and armed. So as long as those are done legally, constitutionally, I applaud that.
Charles Kanjama, do you agree? Were there any other options, actually, between either going to the Supreme Court or calling for mass action? Because a couple of days ago, I think it was on Saturday, that James Orengo said there are other extrajudicial means that we could use that could also lead to this.
I think the extrajudicial means were extra-legal means. And we saw this from the immediate aftermath of the declaration of results, even the day before, when there was a lot of violence. Unfortunately, the violence was both by organs of the state or officers of the state, the police force, as well as many citizens who are protesting the results and thugs who are hiding under the protests to do a lot of illegal activity. So I think the choice of the NASA leadership is the right choice. I think Kenyans are properly intrigued as to the allegations that have been made in the media over the last 1 week as to the elections being stolen. We want to see the evidence. We want to hear the arguments in law. We trust that the media will beam live every word, every image of the proceedings in the Supreme Court. And even though the judges have the last word constitutionally on whether the election was free and fair, the people of this great country will also have a word, because they'll be watching and they'll be able to tell indeed whether those allegations of NASA have the weight that the NASA leadership have placed on them, or whether it is just the cries of a team that has lost fairly.
That's the question, though. Before we get to the merits of the case, which we don't want to discuss because it might be complicated, Danstan, from where you sit, having said that they're going to court, but then say that, oh, Uhuru Kenyatta has won in court 100% of the time. So how can you say we're going to the Supreme Court, but we are not too sure that we will get what we want? And then saying that this is a chance for the court to redeem itself.
What is the biggest paradox is that the Supreme Court finds itself in a very awkward position. One, during the campaigns, before the campaigns got hot, NASA made serious intimidating statements against the Court of Appeal on the matter when it was being decided whether the polling station should be the final place for the results to be announced. NASA said that if the Court of Appeal does reverse that decision of the High Court, it will not be very convincing. The court agreed with them. Come later, Jubilee was aggrieved by the very many decisions, especially the participation question that nullified the Al Ghurair tender. Then the president and his deputy and his lieutenants went on the jugular of the court and actually branded the Chief Justice and some judges by names that they are an extension of NASA. So today, Jubilee, NASA is going to the same court. Two, Jubilee will be in the same court. I don't know whether now the court, whose court it is. When I look at the parallelism between what the political parties have been talking, I look at the same narrative during the ICC trials. When the case of President Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto were in the ICC, there was a serious legal argument, what my seniors are saying, in court.
Right.
But there was serious active political agitation within the country, which ended up making the matters in the ICC a mistrial. So the question that where I sit and where I look at Raila Odinga and his group advancing their theory is that we will be in court, but we will proceed under Article 37, civil disobedience, though it is peaceful. That will be a political activity proceeding when there is a legal activity.
So what will hold
proceeding.
more weight, in the court of law or in the court of public opinion?
In my own view, I think that will end up, for example, if NASA brings 10 million people escorting the petition to court on Friday, will Jubilee also come with another 10 million people escorting their response? Right. Are we likely to see serious political activities outside that will overshadow what will be going on in court?
Are you getting a sense of deja vu? Because we've been here before with your commission, also ended up in the Supreme Court.
It looks like it might just be akin to what we saw in 2013. But again, as lawyers, we must say that it is their constitutional right. The only problem I have is the fact that they are criticizing an institution, or criticizing institutions. We should allow institutions to grow. If today they are accusing the courts of being Jubilee courts and already saying that, oh, we want to say this is the chance the court has to redeem itself, what are they telling us? Is there a predetermined decision in their way? Are they also intimidating the court? And this is what they had against Jubilee when, when the Court of Appeal decided on the polling, on the constituency results to be the final results. So you see, again, we are going to see another war. And I think we should learn, Kenyans should learn that we should allow institutions their independence, which has been given in the Constitution, to work. We have seen that of IEBC, and we have cried out to all the parties that you need to allow IEBC to finish its work. You know, remember when the results were delaying and everybody was like, let's wait for IEBC to complete its work, to declare the result, then we can now say what we need to say.
Respecting institutions, does that mean that institutions should not be criticized? Is that what you're suggesting?
I'm not saying they shouldn't be criticized, but remember they have been given some level of independence and a mandate under the Constitution to deliver. So it is not like the people must come in and interfere or criticize the
Right.
people within those institutions. They need to ensure those institutions are establishing systems.
Okay.
They have structures within which they work, and so those structures and institutions, the systems must be respected so that even as we grow democratically, those structures are growing and we are improving the electoral process now.
Miguna.
But Larry, I was banning because, you see, we have to be historical, not ahistorical. We've always had courts in Kenya. There was a time when these courts were just kangaroo courts. They did whatever KANU did say they should do. They got calls from State House and they did what the executive wanted them to do. And we also still know that even now, our courts are not necessarily clean. There is a lot of corruption in our courts. There are a lot of people who still pay judges to render judgment. So to assume that because an institution is independent, therefore it is unimpeachable, is a mistake. Institutions must be criticized. In fact, they must always be criticized.
Where do you draw the line between criticism and intimidation?
No, it is not intimidating to say that our courts are not at a level at which we can say they're entirely neutral and impartial.
But what
so
NASA
when
says,
somebody says, when NASA says
that we're giving the court a chance to redeem itself, it means if you rule in our favor, then we don't.
That's not intimidating. They are entitled to say what they said. The same way when President Uhuru Kenyatta criticized the court at a public rally, many people thought it was a threat. But I said, well, at a public rally, you can actually criticize the court. I mean, it's one thing to say that somebody had a threat of saying, if you don't do this, I'll do this. They didn't say that. They say we are giving the court an opportunity to redeem itself, which means, and this has not been contested, the 2013 Supreme Court judgment on the Raila Odinga petition was very poorly done. It was incoherent. It was illogical. It was rambling. It was not good jurisprudence. It has been criticized all over the world. And so why should anybody say that the person who lost when that judgment was rendered is not entitled to criticize that judgment? Is entitled to criticize it. That is not to say that he had enough evidence, that he could and should have won the case. That's not the point. The point is independence does not mean that you're immune from criticism.
Right. How do you read, Kanjama, the fact that NASA says we're giving the court a chance to redeem itself?
I think I'm slightly persuaded by Miguna's argument that we can fall into the extreme of ultra-sensitivity and saying that, oh, because you are in an institution which is independent, any kind of criticism is considered to be unacceptable. And I think a democracy is where you also have freedom of speech. We have the rights under Article 33 and 34 of the Constitution, freedom of the media, like what you're enjoying here. We find that in academia, lecturers are constantly criticizing judicial decisions. We do understand there's a political context. In certain jurisdictions, they have called the Supreme Court the political court because there's an awareness that the Supreme Court doesn't just decide matters on the basis of facts and law, but takes into account political context. And even the design of the Supreme Court is one that has been done so as to withstand political pressure that is undue. So I think on one side, the courts have to be ready to accept even robust criticism, and they've said that on several occasions. But on the other side, one has to ensure that that criticism does not turn into an attempt to intimidate the court.
How different is what NASA did today with what President Kenyatta and Deputy President Ruto did at a rally just weeks to the election, which was roundly criticized?
Yes, and I must say that the Law Society of Kenya, of which I'm an official, I'm the chair of the Nairobi branch, issued a criticism of President Uhuru Kenyatta and Deputy President William Ruto for intimidating the court and even mentioning the name of one or two judges personally.
So Uhuru and Ruto were intimidating, but NASA and Raila Odinga were not intimidating today?
I wouldn't want to say that. I think it's a question of judgment. What I can say is that it is very easy for any person on one side of this political current alignment to say that Raila Odinga is intimidating the court, and for the other one to disregard the matter. What I would say is that they need to weigh their words, and I feel that probably the statement of Raila Odinga was on the edge of what is acceptable. Whether he stepped beyond or not, I'm not clear, but what I would say is that it is better if all the parties show confidence and encourage the citizens to have confidence in institutions. Even as you are criticizing them, there is no plan B under our constitution.
Okay.
So they really need to show that they are ready to accept the result. And let me make a personal example that I've experienced, that when judges feel that you're intimidating them, when they feel that you think that they cannot overrule you because of something, you're trying to put them in a corner, then more often than not, they will prove to you, because this is their judicial oath, that they will decide without fear or favor, without intimidation, bias or prejudice. They'll prove to you that you cannot put them in a corner. And so I think more than saying, is what Raila Odinga did right or wrong, I would be asking, is it wise, is it clever, if he wants to prove his case, that he starts off by trying to make statements that appear to be intimidating the court.
What is your view on what Miguna says, that the court petition in 2013, Raila Odinga, was incoherent and just basically bad jurisprudence, I think you said?
It was. As a law lecturer, I'll tell you that it doesn't form any jurisprudence. It adds nothing in terms for anybody who reads the law. It's totally archaic. It's totally unacceptable. It set some precedents that do not exist anywhere. But anyway, that is the law. As it is, it binds every court in this country. So the question of who was the litigant comes into play. Raila Odinga conceded to that judgment. It has taken him 4.5 years to realize that their judgment was questionable. Why that duration? I can understand what my good friend Miguna, my senior,
attacked it immediately.
Yeah, I can understand what Miguna says, is that when we look at the Supreme Court, we are looking at a court that is of the first instance. It is the first court you go and the final court. While when other cases are being filed, you can start from, there are 4 layers: a magistrate's court, a high court, a court of appeal, and the Supreme Court. So once the Supreme Court makes a final determination, you have no any other forum to appeal other than to sulk and make noise and criticize. That could be the only justification, that now that the Supreme Court will be listening this matter for 7 days and gives a final decision, take it or leave it, that forms the law. So that could be the reason as to why anybody who looks for therapeutic treatment will always make that noise. I will be differing totally with my good friend Kanjama here, that once you put the political guns against any government institution, my good sister is here, she'll tell you, no institution, administrative, has ever survived whenever the political artillery has been targeting that institution. And I've given an example of the ICC. We've seen the IEBC. We've seen the ESCC. We've seen all these bodies that have collapsed under the pressure of the political pressure. So the question that everybody is asking, Jubilee set a standard of looking at the person, the judges from a personal angle, in terms of who they are married to, in terms of who their boyfriends are, in terms of whose relatives they are. Suppose that narrative picks up at this time, and now we start looking at the 7 judges from ethnic angles, from where they are married, from who they went to school. Are we likely to get that all the 7 judges have got no option other than to recuse? You said you are not conversant with law. Can they be told to that you cannot proceed with this matter? Are we likely to see some judges who are oversensitive saying they will not proceed with this matter? So those are the scenarios that we are likely to see. Kajama. Are we going to have no judge?
Kajama, you want to respond to that?
Yes. Linus, let me say that I think there's
been... Linus, close.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
There's been excessive criticism of the Supreme Court decision of Raila versus IBC.
Yes.
As somebody who has been both an academic and somebody who's litigated before that court and before other courts, let me clarify and say that that decision has been made reference to in numerous cases, in courts of appeal, in High Court in Kenya, and in other countries as well. I think there has been unfairly excessive criticism of that decision. Definitely when the decision came out, we read that decision and our first reaction was that it could have been written better. There could have been a bit better analysis of the facts of the matter, but its analysis of the law was generally done well. There was one or two misquotations of a minority opinion, but if you assess a judgment of the court on the basis of how often it is referred to, how important it is in determining the jurisprudence of a country, and comparative reference, then that decision is a very powerful decision from that angle.
So which one are you saying was weak? Was it the judgment itself or the case that court then put in, as he was mentioning?
I think the analysis of the facts by the Supreme Court was a bit weak. There was an expectation that there would be a deeper analysis of the evidence that was presented in the case.
And if that would have happened, might they have arrived at a different conclusion, at a different judgment?
I think once they established the legal standard of the burden of proof and so on, it was clear that the case of CORD, as it then was, did not reach that legal burden. In fact, far from it. Of course, CORD argued that the failure to reach that burden or standard of proof was because they had this 800-page affidavit that was rejected. But you see, that was now a procedural issue. But on the evidence that was before the court when they were making the decision, clearly the evidence that was presented by CORD in 2013 did not fit the bill. And my advice to NASA would be that this time, let them not hold back an affidavit until the 8th or the 9th day. Let them file it at the beginning.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, well, being lawyers, we can argue about the merits and demerits of the case, the criticisms, which I must say positively changed a lot of things in election management. But I think generally what came out is that, yes, on a probability of everything that happened, the challenges that IEBC experienced, the challenges were not major as to have an impact on the result that the IEBC declared.
This IEBC or your IEBC?
The former IEBC.
The former IEBC, yes.
Yeah, so leaving that aside, the court went into those specifics where the challenges were and what needed to be done, and the people who are culpable and what kind of punishment or needed to be meted against those officials who had been found to have been, in violation of the Elections Act.
Right.
So I think in that regard, I would say the case went a long way to help the country in moving reforms in the electoral process to the next level. And this is what we have seen now. Maybe we can compare.
Right.
And we have done that on election day. We saw that there was a smooth process. And with a cap of the voters at 700, we were able to vote within good time. Remember, we were polling between 6 and 5 o'clock. Thereafter, we start the counting. So some of these things should not be lost on us, that at least in terms of electoral management, there's been a move.
Right.
And of course, hoping that this time round again, as Kanjama has said, and senior counsel has said, we hope that NASA will present a solid case whereby they have evidence, because they're already talking about a computer generated and all that.
Yes.
But remember, we've been here talking about the Forms 34A, Forms 34B, and C. So how can we be talking about all these forms and yet we are still going back to talk about a computer generated result? Yeah, so these are the gaps that we need to be filled in as a nation, to know where the exact problems are. So I think in terms of just growing the electoral process, we are on track, and we're really looking forward to see what will be tabled in court by NASA.
It should be fascinating. Yes, sir.
Well, let me tell you what the problem is, in my view, of our electoral problem or electoral process. The question you must ask yourself is this: why do we have elections? Why exactly do we have elections? Why do we have courts? We don't have elections so that we declare winners and losers. That's not the purpose of elections. Elections is not just a question of counting votes. Election is so that we create a society that is democratic, that is accountable, that is transparent, that adheres to the tenets of democracy. That's why we have elections. But in this case, for example, the Electoral Commission, the electoral body, believes that its main role is to register voters, to hold elections, to count votes, and to declare winners and losers. Anything else that happens in between, they completely disregard. For example, money has become, Kenyan elections have become monetarized, and people bribe voters, they treat voters and nothing happens. People who have criminal records have been able to contest elections and the electoral body does nothing. The electoral body has received lists of people with evidence from the EACC and it does absolutely nothing about it. So, which means that the orientation of the electoral body is wrong. They don't understand their role vis-a-vis what society expects from them. Secondly, are courts of laws actually supposed to ensure that we have justice? Or is it just a mere chain where you feed something and you get it at the end? We are not in an inquisitorial system like the French, for example, but we are in a system which at the end should not just give us justice, but should make sure that justice is seen to be done. So if you have a judgment, like what my brother Kanjama was saying, that fails in its analysis of the facts, so what were the laws being applied on? Because you only reach a just decision when you apply the laws to the facts, having analyzed them not just rigorously, but correctly.
Isn't part of our electoral process also the fact that those who lose don't agree to have lost, they don't concede?
No, but it would be unfair to expect someone to say that I have lost if the process is so contorted and so mangled that at times it is very difficult to decide who has lost or so take for example what Raila Odinga said today, which I think it would be unfair to dismiss out of hand. He requested, according to what I had, I'm not a member of NASA, I am not privy to what they did or did not do, but I can only respond to what I had. He said they wrote to the IBC,
right,
and they requested all Form 34As so as to be able to determine whether or not the results that were announced actually declared a legitimate winner. And according to them, and I've not had a contradiction from the IBC, Ezron Cheloba, who is the CEO, responded that he was not able to provide all Form 34As. Now this is 1 week after the election. Today that is unacceptable.
Today they finally said all Form 34As are available on the website.
But they have not delivered them. They have not delivered them not just to the contestants, they have not delivered them to the Kenyan people, so that the Kenyan people can interrogate and say, yes, the results you delivered correspond with this. But more importantly, they were releasing figures which were not based on Form 34As. We kept on seeing figures with no information, with no details as to where they were coming from.
All right. Let me ask Lillian respond to that just before we lose this thought as we go to break. What he says about the problems in the electoral process.
Yeah, in fact, I've been listening keenly, and specifically the issues of vetting. I think if you will recall, before the 2013 general elections, there had been amendments to the Elections Act, which stripped the IBC the role to vet candidates. And all candidates had to do was to fill the self-declaration form, which is under the Anti-Corruption Act. So in that regard, IBC had no role whatsoever in the vetting of candidates. And I think the other aspect is about election offenses.
Yes.
When it comes to election offenses, you will recall again, IBC was added prosecutorial powers, investigatorial and prosecutorial powers. But IBC does not have capacity on its own to prosecute and investigate and prosecute. So it has to work with other agencies. And these are the Office of the DPP and, of course, the police.
Okay.
And I remember even in the run-up to the 2013 general elections, we had quite a number of cases which IBC was following up on electoral malpractices. This time round in 2017, we saw the IBC even summoning candidates. And this is because, again, the law has changed.
Okay.
Remember, again, there is a problem with election offenses when it comes to issues of witnesses who are intimidated by candidates or intimidated by supporters, and of course the issue of the evidence itself when it comes to issues of bribery. So there are all these challenges which I believe have been addressed in the now new law that was passed in 2016, the election offenses.
All right, 10 seconds
Election
because
Offences
I
Act.
go to break, yes.
You see, fortunately, I was actually a candidate. So I was one of the people that submitted the Section 13, ethics.
You're one of the people who has also not considered defeat, Miguna.
No. Just listen to me. Listen to me, my friend. We are dealing with a different matter and you're jumping.
No,
let me deal with this matter
Go
first.
for it.
The issue of IBC not having prosecutorial powers, and I didn't say they did. But when you do the self-declaration form and you take it to the EACC are supposed to investigate what your declaration contains and is supposed to respond to the IBC directly on what you have declared.
Right.
And in this case, the EACC directly responded and listed people they believed had lied on self-declaration forms and wrote to the IBC and told IBC these people should not be allowed to run, to vie.
And the IBC
did nothing.
Dunstan doesn't seem to agree.
Yeah.
You said we don't quote sections and articles.
No, go ahead. Go for it.
Article 99 is very clear that only a court of law can bar somebody from contesting. And only when all avenues of appeal have been exhausted.
Yeah.
So where I am coming from, it is only that out of the 12 or 13 commissions, the IEBC's environment of operation is purely a political environment. It's not a legal environment.
Okay.
And therefore the legal regime that assists the IBC to work has been watered by the politicians in a manner that makes the IBC totally ineffective.
Okay.
Just like the Caparo Commission. So we will be whipping the IBC when the tools of operation have been watered totally down.
So have the final comment as we go to break.
The final comment is towards electoral ecosystem. We assume that IBC is in charge of all aspects of the elections, but elections are run by an ecosystem of which IBC is only the most important player. You have the police, you have the political parties, you have the registrar of political parties, you have the laws, you have the Ethics Anti-Corruption Commission. So the success or failure of the elections can never be attributed solely to the IBC. But what you can see is that they have been, as Lillian has been saying, gradually making progress in improving the credibility of elections.
Could I say something?
I have to go to break. We're coming back.
Just one
Okay,
minute.
Lillian, yes.
Before 2013 general elections, and when the 10th Parliament was discussing the law on vetting, I went into the Hansard and read some of the comments that were made by the honorable members of Parliament.
Yes.
And it was appalling to read that you cannot allow IEBC to vet candidates. They will ask you for your marriage certificate, your baptisms, and all sorts of things were in that Hansard. And you realize that IEBC's powers can only be limited to a certain extent.
All right. Let's leave it there just for the moment. Everybody's going to come back with me after the break. We will talk about how can NASA make sure that this case they're presenting to the Supreme Court this time is better than the last one, which Miguna says was incoherent. We'll come back in a moment.
It is a safer way to say it.
This discussion was very interesting during the break about the 2013 petition. Max Ongala also saw the mistake I made before we went to break. Yes. You misquoted Miguna. What he averse was incoherent was the judgment, not the petition. So I stand corrected. Mea culpa.
Yes.
Now that we're here, because people want to handle this, Miguna, let's get it out of the way. The results for Nairobi County. Mike Sonko Mbuvi Gideon Kyoko, 851,000 votes. You came in fourth with 10,000 votes.
Yes.
What happened? You had us all believing you were winning.
What do you mean what happened?
You
A
had us-
democratic process is not a question of numbers. So that's number one. Hitler got millions of votes in Germany in 1936. But was Hitler a good leader because he got millions of votes? You see, that's the question you must ask yourself. This is the challenge Nairobians are going to face.
Are
And
you
I'm
calling
happy
Mike Sonko Hitler?
He's worse. Because Hitler was smart and he's not.
You can't say that
No,
without
that
evidence.
is the truth. That is the truth. I
This
am not
man
going
got
to sugarcoat
850,000
getting
votes. You got
800,000
10,000.
votes. Yes, so what? I got the votes I got, but people know that you can't compare me to Mbuvi on anything other than votes.
So do you believe this is a representation of what Nairobians think, and therefore if they do not think that for now you should be the governor, why shouldn't you concede?
No. It is a challenge. It is a challenge to people like me who believe on merit-based societies, who believe that people should only get jobs that they are qualified to do, and that it should not just be based on the fact that somebody can go pay some voters who are hungry and then they vote for him and he's a good leader. So what I'm saying is this, that it is time that serious people, serious thinkers, serious political animals get into making a decision as to what our country is going to be. Are we going to be led by demagogues and people who can go and make sure that they get huge amounts of votes, but at the end of the day will not transform society? Or do we want transformers of society? Because there's a difference between Kagame, for example, and a demagogue. Kagame did not get power because he was the most popular. But you can look at Rwanda and tell me what Rwanda is. And then you can compare with Amin, who there was a time he was very popular in Uganda, and what remained of Uganda. So we have to be more critical than that.
Okay.
I'm more interested in having a more equal, a more equitable, a more merit-based Kenya, which is governed by the principles of the rule of law and constitutionalism.
To recap.
Than populism.
To recap. So why did you lose, sir?
Why did I lose?
Yes.
No, I don't think that is an answer that I give. That's an answer you give as a voter.
But could I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Miguna, why do you refuse to concede?
Because I don't have to concede.
In
You
other
don't have
words-
to concede because the results are not called by the candidates. The results are called by the Electoral Commission. And if you don't challenge those results, it is assumed that you have accepted the results. So why should somebody say, we're going to stand up and concede? That is silly. I will not do it.
But you have been less than charitable about Mike Sonko on your Twitter at least.
And I will continue to be less than charitable to Mike Sonko because he's not a leader. Mike Sonko is a criminal, a convicted criminal with a criminal record. So, and he's a man that has been published by CIA, the FBI, and been taken to Parliament of Kenya, the National Assembly, as a drug dealer. I will not recognize Mike Sonko. That I will not do. He's not qualified to lead anything. So the fact that you get votes doesn't make you qualified. I'll give you 1 year and you will see the mess in which Nairobi is going to be. Time is going to absolve me, like Fidel Castro said. History absolves people that are like me. But of course, right now, people are so excited about numbers. Numbers mean nothing in a democratic process.
Let me say,
yes, Kanjama.
Before we move to my colleague, that they say democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. To be a true democrat, therefore, one must have a very profound respect for the will of the common man, or Wanjiku, as we say so. Wanjiku can make a mistake, but generally when you take the cumulative views of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands,
851,000.
you are likely to find that there is some common sense. I think it was Chesterton who said that the problem with the common world we are in is that sometimes common sense is not very common. But when you find a cumulative effect of the common sense of many people, I think it behoves us as Democrats to bow down to the will of the people democracy is a process where you are allowed to make course corrections. If you make a mistake, after 4 or 5 years or whatever period, you can correct that mistake. But at least it allows the majority to have their way. And so I think as a Democrat, one reaches that point where you say, look, I believe I was a better candidate, but I must have lacked something. Either I was not able to sell my message well, either I didn't go through the right party, either I was not able to reach down to the person on the ground. Let's give this person a chance.
Okay.
Let's hope for the best, that he succeeds or she succeeds, whoever it is. But I know I'll come back better next time. And that's the only way you can appeal to the voter. Because the voter doesn't just look for the, you could say, your brilliant ideas about how to develop a particular constituency or voting area. The voter looks at many things, including, can I trust you? Will you be approachable to me? And so on.
All right.
I believe Miguna, coming back in a future election, might appeal to the voter. But the first step of appealing to the voter in future is understanding why this time he did not appeal to the voter.
Okay.
By the way, I understand.
Let me come into this issue. I think, with due respect to my good senior here, I'll tell him that he could have not contested in Nairobi. He could have contested in outer space. The reason is that he got 10,000 votes. Had he taken time to study who the voter is, he would not have put his papers in. The voters have their own job description. The voters have what they want. Very many of the academicians and the lawyers and the bright people came into this ballot hoping that the agenda is transformation. Is that what the voter wants?
So the voter doesn't want transformation? Is that what you're saying?
The transformation is part of the definition of the voter. It's not about you.
Okay.
So my good friend here wanted to bring a transformative agenda to people who define transformative as continuously living in the status that they are. So that once he could have gotten that the people are saying, we are comfortable with what we are living with. Then my good friend Miguna could have just said, let me contest in Canada. And that is the reality that we have today. But my good friend Miguna, my good friend Ukuru Okot, have a time in 100 years when they'll be contesting, because 10,000 to 800.
Now you're not talking as a lawyer.
No, I'm only telling you as a let me finish. I'm talking as a political analyst.
Not analyzing anything.
In terms of law, Miguna came as a lawyer.
Yes.
Sonko came as a politician.
And
that is why he connected.
Lillian.
He connected.
In fact, for me, I'm wondering, you know, Miguna has said he's a Democrat.
Yes.
He believes in democracy. Maybe he can tell us whether he believes in the famous words of, is it Stalin?
Yes.
That it is not those who vote that count.
Was Stalin a Democrat?
But those who count
the votes.
You are quoting the wrong person.
No. Maybe you should explain some of these philosophies, if I may call them philosophies.
You see, the reason why we are here and others are not here is because I believe NTV believed that we can filter information, we can digest it, and we can add value. We did not come here as a pedestrian who is just coming to repeat what they pick in daily newspapers and rumors in bars. So I expect a level of rigorous discussion which is lacking at this moment.
No,
because if you're simply saying that's not the reality.
No, I think council
you
has said the reality.
You see, first of all,
that
we are
probably
talking.
You shouldn't have
can I just speak? Can I also
yes.
speak?
You had
see,
another
we are
space.
speaking in the context in which an election is being challenged,
right.
And that if in fact it is challenged successfully, some of these elections, including the ones you are lauding as a demonstration of people's choice, may be invalidated. Because from what I heard, Evans Kidero is also going to court. So let us be a bit introspective, a little bit more analytical than regurgitative. So number one, are those real numbers? Number two, so if a demagogue or whoever, a populist, gets a lot of votes, is that what an analyst would believe should represent what our society is? So that if somebody brings a more nuanced, a more deeper understanding of democracy, they should go back to another country and contest?
But can't you also agree, Miguna, can't you also agree that this represents the collective wisdom of the voters at that time?
No, it may not be wisdom.
This one candidate.
It may not be wisdom.
Larry, let
Do
me
you
say
say
this.
because it is popular, therefore it is wise?
Let me say this.
Wisdom is not popularity.
Lillian.
Let me say this. From the 2013 general election, now that you've said they are going to court, most of them are going to court.
No, I did not say most. I said I know those who are going.
Okay.
Yes.
In 2013, you better be knowing we had about 188 petitions.
Yes.
And about 16 or so by-elections were held. All but 2 returned the same person.
So?
Yeah, so it doesn't mean that all those numbers that will go to court will translate to
So you are
For
an
me,
overturned decision.
But
let me bring in 2 points. And
Real
I'd like
quick,
to
yes,
ask,
because I want to go back to
Miguna-
the conversation
I'd
here.
like to ask Miguna, as we are going back to the conversation. One is, Miguna, have you engaged in any introspection and seen, aside from what may have been wrong with the voter in choosing a populist, what may have been wrong with your candidature that you can improve on next time? In other words, is there, no, there have 2 questions, that's one. And the second question, as we go back to what you are going to, is did you have agents in the different polling stations and constituencies, and did they give you figures which you have compared with what IBC has given and found significant variances so that you can be suspicious of the results?
So I would like us to go to the main discussion, but I'll answer you this. A lot of votes in Kenya are cast on the basis of how much money somebody spent in the election. And that has nothing to do with the quality of the candidate. That has nothing to do with mistakes or good things that you did. If you gave Miguna 500,000 or 500 million or 50 million to go distribute in the slums, you will probably get 1 million votes.
Yes.
So what I'm saying is that it does not mean that the candidate lacked anything other than money. But you can't now value money as an example or as a symbol or a quality of leadership, which is what seems to be happening in Kenya. That you guys look at someone who was literally distributing money according to even investigative reports that were published just days before the election, which is why I'm saying the IBC failed us. Because if they were acting on real evidence on the ground, a lot of my opponents were distributing money willy-nilly everywhere.
And that's
so
what I'm saying.
came to be what reflected on how much they got. But it is because we have created a society with a very huge gap between a very tiny group of people who have the money and a majority that do not have. Miguna would like to bridge that gap. And I have strategies on how I'm going to be able to do that in a short order. And no, I did not have the kind of money that could have hired agents in every polling station. And we had more than 3,300. As a result, there are polling stations, for example, Pumwani Social Hall. I had agents there on almost all polling stations. I got more than 1,000 votes in that specific place. So which means that, yes, a lot of votes were lost because there were no agents.
All right.
But that's not a mistake that you attach to Miguna as a candidate in the sense that I would have to have stolen to have gotten the kind of money that these people were distributing, and I'm not a thief.
So could I ask one question?
We really have spent a lot of time on this. So each of you, final questions, Miguna.
Yes, Miguna will respond. There have been poor candidates, like the gentleman in Meru.
John Paul Murigi, 24 years old, no money at all. He won MP.
Gubernatorial candidate.
Yes, he was an MP candidate.
Not
Murigi.
gubernatorial candidate. If you look at the people who did not have the kind of largesse that I didn't, I was the best. Because if you look, no. Truth be told,
10,000 is massive.
Truth be told, I ran against.
Are you saying that sarcastically?
No. There were 3 billionaires. There were 3 billionaires. Those are the ones that were ahead of me, right?
Yes.
And 2 came from the major parties. So
Yes.
are you surprised? The fact of the matter is this. I would like us to get to a discussion where we are saying, how do we change this voting pattern that seems so robotic of voting in people because they have money or because they come from political fictional constructs called parties, so that Kenyans get quality leadership
regardless of how much money they have.
Yes.
We
are talking.
Your final question, real quick, Dunstan.
My only submissions to Senior is simple, and that's why I said he never understood the vote. Had he done proper research, he'll understand that the voter is a robot. The voter, when he goes to the ballot, the voter is a robot in terms of he operates on a battery called ethnicity. He or she operates on another battery called money. He operates on another one called less intellectualism. So if Miguna had understood the voter,
ethnicity played no role.
I'm saying that is why you lost.
No, it
had
played no
you
role.
asked the ones who have really taken time to study that voter, it was fantastic. 10,000 shillings for 10,000 votes for Miguna.
Yes.
That's fantastic.
Okay.
I'll confess that I thought that he will make not more than 5,000 votes, but he did tremendous well.
Right.
10,000. Probably in 2022
Those are
he'll
real
add.
revolutionaries.
Wait.
I'm telling you.
Wait, Dunstan, you are going to say in 2022 he'll add how many more?
He'll add another 5,000. He will use the same approach. He will use the same approach.
Larry, in defense of the common man,
Yes.
in defense of Wanjiku, I think it would be unfair to characterize Wanjiku as just a robot. We have seen crossover voting in Nairobi and elsewhere.
Right.
And in elections world over, it is the crossover voters, the voters at the margin, who determine election results.
All
Even
right.
in North America, in the United States of America, you have people who voted Democrat since they reached the age of majority, and they're about to die, and they voted Democrat all their lives, and people who voted Republican. But how is the presidential race swinging between Republicans and Democrats? Because you have the swing voters, and I think the same patterns are being demonstrated here. It would be very unfortunate to say that people only voted for Sonko because of money. They actually thought he might change Nairobi.
All right.
And people voted for Esther Passaris because they thought she had already done stuff for Nairobi. You find, when you look at the Nairobi voter from the presidential to the gubernatorial, senatorial, and the constituency, that Nairobi voters were crossover voters. But I'll not say it's only Nairobi voters. Study keenly the trends of voting all over the country. You'll find those for whom ethnicity might be 80 or 90% of the reason why they voted, and other reasons 10%.
Okay. All right.
And those for whom it's the reverse. So let's defend the Kenyan voter, because Larry, you and I are that Kenyan voter that is being criticized.
All right.
Umari has said they are robots.
Let's leave it there. Miguna, also, would you be nicer to people on social media? Would you stop telling them to their grandmother and stuff like that?
Which ones?
You.
No, I think you are getting out of order.
No.
Go back to your discussion.
No.
I think
Miguna.
if you wanted to discuss Miguna on this panel, I would be more than ready to deconstruct you. But I did not come to deconstruct you. Because if you say people, you talk so loosely, and that is unfortunate for a journalist. Because if there is one person who abused me and I responded in a particular way, that's not people, that's one particular individual. And you cannot generalize an individual to mean 45 million Kenyans.
You have given very strong responses to quite a handful of people.
I will continue to give very strong responses because I'm not like you. I'm not looking for popularity for the sake of it.
I'm not looking for
I'm not a
popularity either,
hypocrite.
sir.
No, I'm not a hypocrite who will be so deceitful to get the popularity of people. So if that's, I'm not in the beauty contest.
All right.
Yeah.
Miguna's favorite word is deconstruct.
And I will. We can move back to...
Now we can move back.
Yes.
Can we move back?
Having thus deconstructed
Yes.
this argument, we can now go back to, I want to play for you, President Kenyatta yesterday reached out one more time to Raila Odinga. Watch.
We don't need to fight one another. We don't need to destroy each other's property. We don't need to take life. To our policemen and women, we thank them for the good work that they are doing, but we continue to encourage them to use restraint as they exercise their duties. To our friends who have yet to accept the outcome, we continue to appeal to them that we have extended our arm and a hand of peace and a hand of friendship.
A hand of peace and a hand of friendship. Dunstan, he's done it twice now in his acceptance speech and again in this speech yesterday on the steps of Harambee House.
The president is doing his best. But the question is, are people believing him? That's the question. It is a question of believability. It has been said severally. And this is the question that I'm still posing to this nation. We are always Kenyans when we are looking for votes. But when it comes to, my good friend talks of the construction. Now when we come to construction of government, then you are nowhere. So that is the question that people are asking. The president is twice pleading to the opposition. Is he pleading because he wants after there is a negotiation? It backfires. Right. So in my own view, the president needs a legacy. And the only legacy that this country needs now is an inclusive type of formation of government. Okay. I believe, and I strongly believe, that this time we are going to see a cabinet minister from the Makonde community. If that is done, then you'll see a serious approach. And lastly, Larry, the president is one. Look at the totality of the hawks surrounding him. They are already spitting fire.
Did you say hawks?
Serious hawks. Serious hawks. They have already said, now we had the tyrant of numbers. Now we have the totality of numbers.
All right. Kanjama, do you think that Raila Odinga and NASA should take that hand of friendship that President Kenyatta keeps offering?
First, Larry, what I would say is that they have the right, if they don't believe that the elections were free and fair, to go to court.
And that's what he said in that statement.
To contest to the full extent permissible by law. And a hand of friendship does not mean that you drop your challenge. So to that extent, I think NASA should continue with their challenge because they genuinely seem to believe that the election was stolen. But I think as they are doing so, they should also think about what is in the best interest of the country, which is a de-escalation of tensions, a focus on legal and constitutional means and not extra-legal and extra-constitutional means. And I think to that extent, the former Prime Minister, Raila Odinga, seems also to be going in the right direction. And I think that many stakeholders, including international community, stakeholders within the country, professional bodies, clergy, and others have been appealing to all the sides. Let us disagree agreeably. Let us disagree agreeably, use the proper channels possible. And in the event you win or you lose, be ready to accept the outcome because it is the outcome of institutions that have been given the constitutional power to make the decision.
Hand of friendship and peace that President Kenyatta offers, how would you rate this?
It was a good statement. I would have to say a good statement, but I would have gone further if I was the president or if I was advising him. I would have told him to condemn brutality against innocent and armed civilians.
He says he continues to appeal to the police to exercise restraint.
He should not appeal to the police. He's the president of the Republic of Kenya. You act. You're the chief executive. He's the one under whom Matiang'i operates, and therefore the police. So it is not right that as he was making that statement, somebody called Koome was spitting rubbish on TV, saying that the young 9-year-old girl that was shot with an AK-47, somehow some thugs were hiding behind her and were shooting at the police with AK-47. I mean, that was laughable because we did not see any police being shot at. This was done when people actually witnessed, and witnesses were interviewed, and they said what was happening. This is quite unfortunate. If this had happened anywhere else in the world, Koome would be gone, and Matiang'i probably would have been transferred already, because the head of state needed to condole with that family, needed to be able to express his condolences and empathy towards those who have been brutalized. Brutalization is not good. I qualify what my friend Kanjama was saying about extra-legal demonstrations, and I'm sure he did not mean that demonstrations are extra-legal.
Of course not.
They are within the ambit of the law and are very constitutional. So if people feel aggrieved, because ask yourself, Larry, when the election results were announced, Jubilee supporters poured out of their homes and wherever they were.
They were out celebrating.
Demonstrating.
Yes.
I mean, it is a demonstration of support. They were not shot at. They did not seek permission from the police to demonstrate or to carry twigs and run all over the street and interrupt, traffic. They also caused a ruckus. They were allowed to do that.
Yes.
It was constitutional. It was legal for them to do so. They did not necessarily harm anyone, but some actually got hurt. And I believe one or two may have died in the process. But when Raila Odinga supporters left to demonstrate peacefully, they were met with truncheons and gunshots, live bullets. That should not happen. So what I'm saying is this. The president did a good thing to extend an olive branch, but he needed to go further. He needed to rein in what my friend Omari called hawks,
right.
And he needed to be able to bring order and some semblance of civility within his administration.
Right.
And I hope going forward he will do so.
Larry, let me just say that I agree with Miguna to the extent that actions speak louder than words. As late as today, you have had continuous harassment of some civil society organizations because of perceived intention to file an election petition. That was very unfortunate. A hand of friendship that is stated in words has to be shown in deeds as well. And I think that is an important point. The president needs to demonstrate that he's doing more and that he's ensuring that those who are under him, who are very excitable and very zealous in trying to bring down the opposition, which goes against democratic tenets, do not do so.
Right.
But having said so, there is a responsibility to all of us as Kenyans. And I think Article 37, which talks about the freedom of peaceful assembly, says peaceably and unarmed. We must condemn both sides or all sides, whether it is Jubilee or the government or NASA supporters who go beyond the constitutional imperatives of peace, unarmed, and ability to challenge through constitutional means.
Yeah, I would say that I agree with the sentiments across here, that the president was responsible in his address. And if I recall, he said very well that even if the NASA supporters want to go out and protest, they don't need his permission. They can go out, protest peacefully, and all will be well. But again, the other thing that has been doing rounds in social media, people have been pleading out to others, please celebrate in humility. I've seen a lot of those WhatsApp messages going out, that those of you who are celebrating, celebrate in humility. You're not going to go to your neighbor's house because now the country, we are all divided. You're either NASA or you are Jubilee. So you are a Jubilee, you are running to a NASA gate and screaming happily, whereas you know your neighbor is hurting. So I think people have been going all out in a responsible way to say to each other, let's celebrate, or let's accept results in humility, knowing that this country belongs to all of us. And that also goes to all the leaders on both sides of the divide. This is not the time Kenyans want to hear irresponsible statements. That could not be tolerated during campaigns. They were grueling. This time round, the leaders and first of all, the president has a responsibility to unite the country. So the last thing we want to hear is any statements that will divide the people further.
All right, I talked about what the NASA case is likely to be in the Supreme Court when it comes up, hopefully in the next few days. I want to play for you what Raila Odinga said today in deciding that they were going to go to the Supreme Court after all, which they had initially ruled out. Watch.
Wengi wa Kenya walijitokeza kwa wingi zaidi kupiga kura. Lakini yale yalifanyika yamejulikana. Nasema wa Kenya hawezi kuvumilia tena wizi wa kura. Haya viongozi ni vifaranga vya kuku, vikaranga vya kompyuta. Kompyuta iliwataga, kompyuta iliangulia, kompyuta ikawatoa. Vifaranga vya kompyuta.
Miguna, your reaction?
I want to be fair to the Right Honorable Prime Minister. He was speaking as a candidate. as a presidential candidate for NASA. And he was speaking as an aggrieved candidate. He was not speaking as an advocate for Raila Odinga. And he was not reading submissions to the Supreme Court, nor was he referring to briefs filed before the Supreme Court. So his was a political statement. And as far as political statements go, I don't find anything wrong with what he said. Because that is not his case before the Supreme Court. We have to wait for the case NASA will file before the court.
And the
we cannot rely on clips
right.
to judge the quality of evidence that NASA is going to present before the court.
At least we have a general sense of what that case might be, because he said we have now decided to go to the Supreme Court to prove what a computer-generated leadership this was. Understand?
My question that I'm asking the former Prime Minister, when he calls other leaders Vifaranga, what does he want to tell the Kenyans? Is that the narrative? Is that the rhetoric? Is that the language towards when this country is so polarized? It is not the best mode of communication. The NASA leader read a very good report or statement. I wish he could have finished from there. After he started talking in Kiswahili, he created his own blunders. And these are some of the reasons Raila always destroys his case every time he moves away from the written speech.
Okay.
Number two, from the speech that he wrote, you'll see that he's talking about failure to comply with the law in terms of transmission of the results. Number two, a consistent pattern in terms of the pattern of either 11%, the difference is always constant, not only for the presidential campaign, and also some gubernatorial positions. The third argument he generates is that there must have been hacking. So all that we are saying, none of us knows what Raila Odinga has, because he can say this thing, but as lawyers, until the application has been filed, their nextures, what we call the supporting documents, have been presented.
Okay.
And IBC files theirs, Jubilee files theirs, then we'll be able to say he has a good case or he doesn't.
Lillian, how do you go about proving, as they say, that this was a computer-generated leadership, so alluding to the hacking? Because the logs of the supposed hacking have been criticized and delegitimized in the court of public opinion by experts who say this does not prove anything.
Yeah, of course, until the case is heard in the Supreme Court, we cannot preempt anything here. But I think listening to that statement, one would be tempted to laugh or, find it funny. But what Miguna has said is true, that this is coming from somebody who is hurting. And hurting and looking back at where he's coming from. But sitting where I am, I would say this, that the elections law had only one provision on the deployment of technology in elections. But in 2016, the law was amended, and that one provision was repealed to bring in a raft of many other provisions in terms of what kind of technology to deploy, how you're going to store your data, access to the codes, the KIA, if the KIMS was introduced, and so many other things that are in Section 44 of the Elections Act. Now that we had all that and ready to conduct this election in 2017, we are now faced with another situation where we are going to delve deeper to find out what happened. There is now hacking. Yet, remember again, we have Form 34A right at the polling station. That is a hard copy. We are talking of a hard copy that was signed by the presiding officer, the agents, then it was scanned and transmitted to the constituency tallying center, right, to the national tallying center. So you have a trail of papers where you can trace where you are coming from.
Okay.
And this is the evidence we want tendered before the Supreme Court. Remember, IEBC will have 48 hours within which to present all the documents that they used from the polling station to the constituency to the national tallying center. So they have to be prepared. They are not going to go to the Supreme Court and tell the court that we do not have Form 34 and we need more time. Yet we only have so many days, 14 days, within which the Supreme Court must hear and determine the case.
Right.
So I think we have brought this on ourselves, if I may say, as a country. We insist on technology. And technology must be used in a way that is transparent or perceived to be transparent to the nation. So I think these are issues that will be unfolding in the Supreme Court, and I cannot say much for now, but I think people will be waiting for the evidence and not just rumors and propaganda on what happened or what may or what could have happened. Bring the evidence, and on that basis, the court can determine the case.
Kanjama, your sense of how this case ends, or how it must play out before the Supreme Court if they present a strong case?
Larry, Section 83 is the only one I'll cite of the Elections Act, is the fulcrum upon which this case is going to rest. It's a very important provision. The Supreme Court in the Raila case, in the other election cases that they dealt with thereafter, Hassan Joho case, Peter Munya case, and so on, have referred to it repeatedly. The courts of appeal, the High Court in Kenya have referred to it. It's a provision that comes from English law, but which we have adopted as part of our constitutional interpretation of framework. It says that no election shall be declared void by reason of non-compliance with any written law relating to that election, if it appears that the election was conducted in accordance with the principles laid down in the Constitution and in that written law, and that the non-compliance did not affect the result of the election. So our courts have basically come up with two tests. One is called the qualitative test. In other words, looking at the non-compliance, because there's no election which has 100% perfect compliance, whether it is in America, in the United Kingdom, in France, or in Africa. There's no election where everything is perfect. So what the courts check is those instances of non-compliance, qualitatively, were they so significant, so substantial, that they distorted the constitutional principles for free, fair, credible, and verifiable elections? They have to be substantive, you have to show a pattern, and not just distorted instances here and there. Then the second test is the quantitative test, which is even more significant, because the Supreme Court in the Raila versus IBC case referred to it, the Supreme Court in the Joho case referred to it, and the quantitative test is simply this. Those instances of, for example, wrong results that you are referring to in the Form 34's discrepancies, when added together, do they bridge the gap? In this case, do they bridge the gap of 1.4 million votes? And what I would say, Larry, is this. If you notice during the presentation of evidence, during the presentation of the case, that NASA's case is tending towards overemphasis on these electronic algorithms, it will be a clear indication that they are heading down the wrong path. For the simple reason, and again I'll use two words, inbuilt redundancy. The electronic transmission system was an inbuilt redundancy, while the actual method that was used to compute the votes, as Lillian has explained, was through physical forms that were transmitted from the polling stations to the constituency tallying centers, the national office. So they would need to actually go beyond the, what I would call it, focus, the spatial
So the
focus.
case cannot hinge on this supposed hacking of the IBC transmission or the server.
Let me put
That's
it
what you're
this way.
saying.
As somebody who has studied and been involved in electoral cases, if you find that their case is hinging on that fact, just cross it off. You know that it will not head to a final determination, because those final tallies did not come from the server.
They'd have to be in the physical
They
forms.
came from the form 34A, 34B, 34C. And I think if Kenyans were to just study the way the Form 34A looks like, the way the Form 34B looks like, with the tallies of each Form 34A, the way the Form 34Cs look like, just visit the portal that has been opened by IBC of forms, you'll realize that you can use the electronic argument to show that there was a climate created to try and steal the election, which is what I think NASA will be trying to argue. But if your main argument is that the election was stolen through a computer algorithm, and yet the Form 34A, B, and C was not computed through that computer algorithm, you've walked down the wrong path, you've ended up in the wrong destination.
Larry, I want to say that I agree with Kanjama on his legal premise. The section
83 of the Elections Act. When
I agree with him and his analysis of it and how it would impact on the outcome of the decision. But I believe that his illustration is actually off the mark given what NASA said. And this is what I would like to say. NASA, and I've listened to them very carefully, they have alleged that Raila won the election.
Yes.
In fact, before the declaration of the elections, they cited a numbers. They said Raila Odinga got this, Uhuru Kenyatta got this. The question that a lawyer would ask is, do you have the evidence? Because if they do, then of course it will change your argument, Kanjama, because they would be able to demonstrate that.
When they gave those numbers, Miguna, they said that a confidential source of the IEBC had told them that those were the actual numbers in the server.
No, regardless of whether the source is confidential or not, as a litigant, as a lawyer, even as an advocate who litigates cases, you know that sometimes you may not be able to tell your opponent who the witnesses are.
Yes.
But then at the time of litigation, you will be able to say who these people are and be able to demonstrate that what you have is credible. So I hope that they do have that, confidential or not. So you secure your witnesses and then you produce the evidence.
All right.
The second thing is that, and what troubles me, is that the IBC itself has not been able to say that they have all Form 34As from which the numbers came from. Now, assuming NASA does have all 34As, which IBC has not disclosed, and then at a certain stage, IBC discloses Form 34As, which are different from what NASA has, and NASA sources are the same as IBC sources, then you can see that, and Kanyama knows, when it comes to issues of litigation, credibility accounts for 80% of the case. If NASA can demonstrate that the evidence that IBC has produced is so tainted with some kind of conspiracy or whatever it is that they can be able to demonstrate and attack the credibility of IBC officers to the extent that the court does not believe anything they produce, then the quantitative part of it becomes nugatory.
All right.
Because the court then will say, because we cannot trust you, because we do not believe you, it does not matter how many pieces of paper you produce before us. This case...
I agree with Miguna, only to add that for the qualitative test in this particular election, NASA will need to aim their guns, not just at IBC. They'll need to aim their guns against Jubilee, which has similar figures. They'll have to aim their guns against several observers, including Election Observation Group, ELOG, against probably even people in the media. So they'll have to bring down several people to be able to discharge the qualitative test. I'm not saying they can't do it. Of course they can do it if they have the evidence required. What I'm saying is that they have the work cut out for them.
The work cut out for them, Dunstan, as you make your final comments, what they have to prove is what I think the statement stood out, and Kevin Kyoga in fact tweeted it, that it was a computer-generated leadership, they called it, which is voted by an algorithm that transmits results in a consistent disparity across the system. So that's part of their argument.
That is a question of statistics. It will not be an argument, a legal argument, to argue that this has never happened, therefore it cannot happen here. You must prove that indeed whatever is that algorithm is generated by one or two issues. Number two, when you look at NASA's allegation, and it's a very serious allegation that there are polling stations that are not gazetted. If that is proved, that there were polling stations that were not gazetted, what means is that there were votes that were pumped into the IBC servers from non-people, either dead people or imaginary people,
or people
who ought not to have voted. If that can be proved, that will be very fatal to the election of President Uhuru Kenyatta. In another way, NASA has been talking about the server. For the benefit of Kenyans, NASA can make an application as the first thing to be decided that they want an order for that server, the content of that server to be produced in court. What is in that server that Chebukati never wanted anybody to see? In my own submissions, I think that all that, Larry, we've done here is purely academic.
Right.
The reality is either tomorrow or Friday, when we have the documents presented in court with all the evidence that NASA has. My good senior here, my chairman, has said it, that in 2013, NASA lost because they thought they will ambush the last day and file
this 800-page submission. Yes.
This time they have learned a bitter truth. I think that between
Maybe
NASA...
it was not strategic.
Yeah, I'm saying, I think between NASA and the IBC and Jubilee, NASA must be prepared more better because they've lost, and the bigger burden for them is to prove that they have a case before the IBC starts rebutting, or before the IBC, we said we don't become lawyers, before the IBC and Jubilee started denying that what these guys are saying does not exist. We wish all the parties success. And my final take is that I hope that in the next 14 days, this country remains intact.
Okay.
Nobody causes problems. Let us give the judicial process time so that the lawyers will work tirelessly and the decision will come out.
Lillian gets the last word.
Last week I saw the technical team. We were here watching the technical team of NASA saying they were still waiting for all the forms.
Yes.
And they acknowledged that they did not have the technical capacity to go through all those forms that they had and know exactly what was what, and it was going to take a long time for them to determine exactly what was wrong or what really happened. But having said that, I think I would say the primary documents we are looking at are the forms 34A, 34B, 34C. Those are the primary documents. And those are the documents which we will expect the IEBC to produce once the petition has been filed. And I've said IEBC will have 48 hours to do so. So having again said that, I think the issue of the servers or not, as I said, the Elections Act is quite elaborate on how we are going to deploy technology, the access to that technology, and how it will be used even during the presidential election. The onus now will be on NASA to prove this system that we deployed, that IEBC deployed, was hacked, and because it was hacked, this is the result we have. But we cannot sit here and discuss that this was computer generated. Computer generated, no. We know the procedures right from the polling station. This document, the Form 34A, is the document upon which all the results from the polling stations are all sent to constituencies and to the National Tallying Center. So let them rebut that before the court, and we see how the case goes.
Great. Do you think this, some NASA supporters might be a little apprehensive about taking this to the Supreme Court, given how NASA prefaced this by saying we're not confident Uhuru Kenyatta has won a lot more cases than we have? Is this likely to be adjudicated fairly, in your own opinions?
NASA supporters, it's not their prerogative. The decision has already been made by their principals. The matter is going before the Supreme Court. Whether you are apprehensive or not, the ultimate decision will be made by the court.
Okay. Your view?
I think we need to encourage Kenyans to build confidence in the Supreme Court. We know that the people who will be making the decision are human beings like we are, but they are specially trained. They are among the best that we have to offer. They have risen to that high position. They have taken an oath of office, and we have to be confident and hopeful that if given the law and the evidence to support a particular argument, and with the whole country watching, they will make the right decision.
Okay.
And we will be bound by it.
Dunstan?
My last submission is that there is the political gimmick that NASA is playing. saying that, oh, we cannot verify these things, oh, we are weak, oh, it might be a strategy. You remember what Ojamong did in Busia?
Busia.
He appeared to be the weakest candidate. What happened after the results were announced? So I believe that the Ojamongian theory might be used by the NASA theory that having lost in 2013, they know very well where they went wrong.
All right.
Jubilee has never lost in a presidential campaign. They might not have prepared.
There was no Jubilee in
So,
2013.
whatever it was. If you look at the way the timing NASA has been playing, oh, we will not go to the Supreme Court. Oh, we will not go to the Supreme Court.
Now we're
Today, the media was prepared for a different story. NASA says we are going to the Supreme Court. So in my own view, I think that the game of camouflage, the game of decoy is part and parcel of the legal and political process. We are yet to see what is in store for us.
I think I must add here
Really
that
quickly, yes.
it's not fair that NASA has given that statement today that they hope the court will redeem itself this time round. That is politics.
Yeah.
And you cannot put politics in a matter that is as weighty as this.
All right.
Yeah, and this
But
is why we
Raila
are
is
saying...
a politician.
We know
You're telling a
that, we
politician not to
know
be a
that,
politician.
but
Refer to the
when-
ICC.
Yes, in terms of the petition going before the Supreme Court, it's a matter of law, and that is it.
All right, let me read some tweets real quick before we go. Joe Opu says, I'm surprised that Saint Omari, he put that in quotes, finds fault in Raila calling people Vifaranga, yet totally okay with him referring to people as hawks.
And robots.
You don't find Raila, you don't find anything wrong with the Vifaranga, but you find you're okay with calling people hawks.
It is purely the semantics.
Okay, great. Josh Karoki says, Gambians must be laughing at our digital polls fiasco while they voted out a dictator using marbles. You all remember that?
Yes, of course.
It's a great sense of humor, Josh Karaoke. Wanjiro G says, we live in a country where mistrust of the electoral process is so dire that the citizenry would rather do the counting themselves.
We'll get there.
Who will trust them?
Jackie
There is
Mwandwa.
no trust.
Miguna on side by elections are for credibility and democracy. No criminals on the ballot. Repercussions for election fraud. Truth. Somebody agrees with you. And Kennedy said, me and Jesus encouraging Miguna, who performed dismally and is not going to concede. This is the image.
So that person has gone to heaven and seen Jesus.
With a light
I must say thank you to Nyiva Mwinzi. Good conversations, mind-provoking and sensible. It was really good until Muguna threatened to deconstruct me.
I do. Next time you run around.
Muguna loves to deconstruct people.
No, there are 3 lawyers here for your defense. Don't worry.
You mangled his words.
I mangled his words and I apologized at the earliest opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on tonight. We'll be referring to you and calling on you in the days ahead as this case goes to the Supreme Court and is determined. So when we call on you, please come back.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Larry. It was fantastic.
The pleasure was all ours. Okay, that's it for Sidebar. We're back next Wednesday at 8 p.m. and at 10 p.m. right here on NTV because there's so much Sidebar we can't fit it in one time slot. So we had to get 2 time slots, okay? See you next Wednesday. I'm at Larry Meadow. Good night.